The world of AI, many people believe, is a little bit like the Wild West right now, with each company trying to get the advantage on the other. But now you are seeing some executives, Microsoft Satya Nadella being the latest, talk about maybe a slight pullback on the race and one that will not just have all the companies thinking about making sure they have the best AI product. The competition seems to be going past the level of healthy rivalry and into a level of conflict that may not be a good thing in the end. So, what has to happen when competition goes too far? Henning Piezunka is associate professor of management here at the Wharton School and has looked at this area. Henning, always great to talk to you. It's been a while. Thanks for a few moments today.
Good to see you, Dan. Thanks for having me.
I guess where we are right now, what's going on in AI is kind of this best case scenario to understand of these potential concerns in what we're seeing in the level of competition going on between these companies.
Right. So, nobody really knows how much you should invest, right? It's going to be a big market, but the question is really how much of a market it's going to be. Now, you see, even without any kind of personal rivalries and stuff like that, it's already very difficult to determine how much you should invest. This could be like a winner takes all market. And so you almost have like a rational overinvestment, so to speak, right? Because everybody's competing to be the winner in this market. The other thing you have to take into account, what's absorptive capacity. You see, you have to actually invest to learn from others, right? So even if you kind of want to be a good second player, you still have to invest tremendously to actually understand what the current leader in this race is doing. And then what you're pointing out, there may also be like personal aspects about it, right? I want to have the best LLM. I want to have the best AI. I want to be the first in space, right? So very often what research shows, competition can actually become personal.
So, what are the elements then that separate, I think, what we would believe to be healthy competition and what could be a quote unquote destructive rivalry?
So then I give you like a project I'm currently working on, which I really kind of what I've enjoyed tremendously. That gives you just a feeling for how this kind of sometimes becomes irrational. Okay. So we had a look at who actually firms consider to be their competitors. And that's obviously a very kind of critical choice, right? Like how much market overlap do you have today? How much market overlap do you expect in the future? Industries might converge and stuff like this. And so there are lots of kind of things you have to take into account. And we wondered, okay, how do managers deal with this? Okay. And now here comes the kicker then. So what we find is that if the CEO went to college where the CEO of the other company went to college where they had a college rivalry, they are more likely to consider each other competitors.
Okay.
So imagine you have one company where the CEO went to Duke and the other CEO went to UNC. All right. Now, this has absolutely nothing to do, obviously, with the competition
Right.
where they are today, but nevertheless, they see each other more as competitors. And so we outlined this, like we're working on this and we have fleshed this out in like tons of robustness checks and the effect holds. So it's a very strong effect that clearly shows that there's an amount of, yeah, an element of irrationality in all of this, I would say.
But don't so how do leaders within companies then deal with these components when maybe collaboration might be the better option?
So this is, you see, like the way you frame it, right? It's not an either or. It can actually be both, right?
Okay.
Sometimes it's competition, and sometimes it's collaboration, right? I give you see, like one thing that I find very interesting. Very often, it's not particularly clear, even within top management teams of one company, right? Like imagine I ask you, Dan, like, is NYU Stern a competitor of Wharton or is it a collaborator, right? And you could make the case like, well, it's a competitor because we are like competing for MBA students and stuff, right? But you could also say like, no, they're great collaborators, right? We have lots of professors who actually work with fantastic NYU faculty. We have hired from NYU Stern. NYU Stern has hired from us. So you see, it's actually rather complicated to see like, oh, it's just competition or it's just collaboration. In many ways, it can often be both.
Right.
Okay. And one thing that research actually finds that I've shown in a paper together with Frucci Stacharenki a few years ago is one thing, it's actually not particularly important that you're not competing. What's super important is that you are aligned in your understanding of whether you are also competing when you collaborate or whether you're not competing. Okay. but you really want to be crystal clear about whether there's also competition going
Do
on.
those lines get blurred sometimes in maybe not understanding truly what is competition and what is rivalry?
All the time. Then what we find all the time is that there's misalignment. So what one firm would see the other as a competitor, but the other would not see the other as a competitor.
Right.
And this is like completely bizarre outcomes, right? Like sometimes you have these collaboration meetings where from one firm, two kind of folks walk into the meetings, and from the other firm, two folks walk in, but with four lawyers. And that in that moment, you're like, oh, you think about this very, very differently than we thought about this. Okay. And it's typically when these kind of perceptions are not aligned, that is really when these kind of relationships tend to fall apart.
So you mentioned Duke and North Carolina, and obviously a lot of that rivalry is occurs in the world of sports. I think a lot of people might say that the world of sports may be able to give us a little bit of a better understanding of rivalry versus collaboration, correct?
Look, in many ways, this is more and more the focus, I will say, at Wharton. Like we have been looking at this. I've been looking a lot of this in my research. I've looked at chess. I've multiple papers on Formula One. I've papers on NBA basketball. I've papers on soccer. If any of our listeners here is interested in it, don't hesitate. Drop me an email. I'm happy to kind of send all of these papers to you. You see, I think there's a tremendous amount we can learn from sports, sometimes about kind of the micro interactions, right? Like how do you compete and how do you collaborate, or how do these things go off the rails, right? But you see, I would actually go even broader than that. You see, in some ways, we can actually learn kind of with respect to politics, like in some ways, sport governance is actually superior to like state governance at this point, right? You see, like, so we actually have very strong norms that are enforced. Competition is actually rather healthy in sports if you compare it to other parts of the market. So you see, you need to be very aware of the boundary competition. Business is not really like sports, right? You see, like sports has very well defined kind of rules and stuff like this, and business very often not like that. So you need to understand the boundaries. But if you understand the boundaries, you can learn a tremendous amount from it.
So is then the level of competition we're seeing right now increasing at a much rapider pace than we've seen maybe in decades past because of kind of everything that is going on in our culture right now?
Then this is a very interesting question. You see, like, I think no matter at which point you go back in time, there's been a book, I believe it's been published in 1994 called Hyper Competition,
Right.
where people have basically said, like, hey, competition has been so incredibly intense, right? This is by Richard Devaney, who used to be at Wharton like a few years ago. And so I think we are always complaining about like, oh, competition has gotten so intense and competition has gotten so intense. I think it's actually very difficult to kind of compare this across time. It does feel like a very intense moment where there's a lot at stake, right?
Right.
You see, I think what has really become more common then, I think that explains it, the kind of tremendous dominance of technology company, and these markets are very often the winner takes all, or at least the winner takes most.
Right.
And whenever you have like winner takes most or winner takes all markets, the competition tends to become very, very intense.
Well, I think it's also interesting that when you look at artificial intelligence right now, there is obviously the race that is going on with the companies like Anthropic and OpenAI. But then you can even go down the chain a little bit and look at the energy infrastructure component, and there's competition going on within those companies to be able to gain the space, gain those business partnerships with those companies. And so that level of competition just keeps going down the food chain.
Look, this is something I think people very often kind of underestimate. Ron Aitner, an alumni of our PhD program and these days full professor at Dartmouth, has actually kind of done a lot of research on this, right? When you think about competition, you really cannot just think about like one layer of the ecosystem or one layer of the vertical infrastructure. What you really have to do is to think about the whole ecosystem. How do you actually create value across the complete stack? And so sometimes what you see, sometimes you can have these horizontal competition, but sometimes you can have stacks competing against one another, which are really organized in a different manner.
I'll finish up with this. Is there something then that would kind of that needs to occur that would make collaboration stand out as a better option in many cases? Or is it just kind of a dynamic of this each situation as it plays out?
Henry Kissinger had this famous sentence, right? Like in international politics, they're really not like friends or like they're always just interests. I think what firms always need to figure out is where are the spots on which can you collaborate. So we shouldn't think of a world as like, oh, there's competition and there's collaboration. I think this is the mistake that very often people do. To think like, oh, it's either competition or it's collaboration.
Right.
And in most cases, it's really both. Okay. Look, this then is also true in all our personal lives, right? Like you see, like I actually go with my friends to the same school class, high school class or college, and we're collaborating on projects and stuff like this. But at the same time, we are competing for dates and we are competing for becoming valedictorian and stuff like this,
Yeah.
right? So competition and collaboration just exist. And I think the winners will be those who actually navigate that tension the very best to understand when do we collaborate, on what do we collaborate, when do we compete, how do we compete, without actually then kind of undermining the collaboration. So there's never going to be like it's either that or it's that, but it's always a careful navigation of the two, and hopefully then to find lots of spaces where we can collaborate and then compete effectively.
Henning, great to talk to you again. Thanks very much for your time. All the best.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good
That
to see you.
good to see
Thanks
you
for
as
having
well.
me.
Henning Piezunka, who is associate professor of management here at the Wharton School.